Welcome back to All Terrain Marriages. We're Danny and Stephanie Gutierrez. In today's session, we're going to continue taking a look at that word navigation. Again, we've covered some really important ground together, talking about some of the things that make us these all-terrain marriages, these marriages that are built tough, that are agile, that can get through some of the roughest and toughest, most challenging terrains that life has out there. We've talked about the word location. Remember? This ability to check in with ourselves and know where I'm at personally and know how to acknowledge where my spouse is personally so that we can know where we're at together as a couple. We also talked about lubrication, the things in our relationship that keep those gears really greased up and so that we don't seize up and we don't overheat. And in our last session, we began talking about the word navigation. Not so much focusing on the destination being some accomplishment or some goal or some place, not because those things aren't important, but we decided to focus rather on the routes in navigating those spaces from our heart to our spouses. Mm-hmm. Because listen, we don't want to be those people that accomplish impressive things, but forfeit and lose our marriage along the way. Right. Listen, no destination is worth arriving to without your spouse.
So today, we're going to dial in one more concept into our navigation systems to help us more effectively make the trek along all these new routes that we have mapped out. And the concept we want to talk about today is stances. What is stances? It's the predominant posture we choose to take in our interpersonal interactions. Okay, we're going to break that down because you're like, what does that mean? Posture. Okay, to begin to explain, it's not referring to our physical posture. This is really more of an emotional or an internal posture. We know that everyone engages relationships, moments, interactions in a different way, right? Some people are shy, some people are aggressive, some people are huge talkers, some people are quiet listeners. So our knee-jerk, most natural, raw self that we bring to an interaction with somebody is called a stance. And when we understand what our default stance is, what our spouse's default stance is, it can really help us navigate toward one another more effectively. And there are three relational stances, each of us most comfortable with one of them. And I think the simplest way to say all that we've been trying to say here is stances are the ways we try to get our needs met in relationships. The ways we try to get our needs met in relationships. And the way to really know what your stance is to imagine what you would do in a tense situation where there's some conflict or discomfort. Because that's going to put you into your stance. So the first stance, we'll dig into them, are withdrawn. And a person in the withdrawn stance tries to get their needs met by moving away from others, minimizing needs, looking internally for a solution, trying to figure it out on my own. And people with this stance, more than any other, they need time to process, to think about things, to be alone. In a tense situation, someone in the withdrawn stance, their knee-jerk reaction is to put their guard up, to create a bubble or some space, or maybe they'll tune out the conflict. You might see a faraway look in their eye. I don't need anything. Or they might go to the bathroom and not come back. This isn't bad. It doesn't mean people like this don't love people. They just need a certain amount of space to process life so they don't get disoriented. They try to meet their needs mostly on their own. This is actually my stance, so it's a great stance. I know, I've become a very outgoing person who is comfortable with people, but friends, that was not my default. So my first two jobs in life, one was a waitress, beyond stressful. I had server nightmares for like 2 decades afterward. And then a job hosting gatherings for newcomers for the church and to throw parties and host them. I was so terrified before every party that actually, this is real. I carried a note card in my pocket with ideas of questions I could ask people. I would run to the bathroom, reference it. Also, I've learned to do conflict well, but I hate it, still hate it, probably always will hate it. And I love being alone and quiet with a fierce and holy passion. I wake up really early every morning so I can be quiet for, ideally 2 hours. Doesn't always happen, but That would be great. Before I begin my day, it's my time to just be alone and charge up. I could go longer. I could do like 3 hours, I really think, but I don't. We could say it this way. So the withdrawn stance is someone who steps back, takes a step back. Then another stance is the dependent stance. That's our second stance. Someone in the dependent stance, in an effort to get their needs and desires met, is going to move toward others with solutions. So withdrawn is to step back. Dependent is to step toward, step forward. They're people who need more closeness. They need people close by to process with, while also really needing a sense, I think, of receiving support and also being able to give support. And their knee-jerk reaction is to approach with open arms. So they might move toward their spouse by trying to do what they think is the right thing, or by helping, or serving, or through showing loyalty. And if there's tension in a relationship, they're going to want to solve it.
Yeah.
They're going to reach out. Some people in this stance have hot tempers, some don't and are really quiet. There's different personalities within this stance. But they need to be okay in their relationships, in their most important relationships, I should say. And this is a stance that can struggle with boundaries. They often exert a lot of energy to try and fix things and make them right. And Danny is in the dependent stance. So
Guilty as charged.
no, it's a good thing. He's more intentional about seeking me out. He's a lot more thoughtful than I am. He notices what I need, like intuitively. He walks into a room, I'll watch him just immediately notice people and what they might need or what they might enjoy. He's amazing. And then that third stance, and last stance, is the assertive stance. This is where a person moves against others. Or we could say they step up. If there is something or someone in the way of their goals or their plans or their happiness, they're going to find a way to move it and get it done. These are people who value independence, really need a sense of control. So things that might feel like conflict to a withdrawn or dependent person probably won't to an assertive person. So if you're at a restaurant, for example, and the server brings you raw chicken, it is awesome to have somebody with you who's an assertive person because they usually have no problem at all sending the food back. Some might do it sweetly, some might do it more directly. Again, depending on personalities within this. But if they see a problem, they just step up. In all of this, keep in mind two things. First, there is no stance that is better than another. And second, these stances are independent of whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. You can have extroverts who love being with people that withdraw, and you can have introverts that are very dependent. So why are stances important? Why are we talking about this today? Because so many arguments, conflicts, tension, it can just be really avoided or resolved by understanding your stance and how it's perceived, while also knowing your spouse's stance and not reading too deeply into it. So if I don't recognize that Danny's in the dependent stance, I might forget that if I take too much time alone, it's going to feel to him like I'm ignoring him or pushing him away. And then also, I need to make an effort to notice his needs, not just let him meet mine. Flip side, if he doesn't recognize that I'm in the withdrawn stance, he's going to forget that when he gets really passionate or upset about something or talks about relational conflict, it stresses me out and it can be tough for me to engage honestly. What this does is it helps us interpret our spouse's actions with more grace and more understanding. It gives us more empathy for where they're coming from. Now, I will say we should never use our stance as an excuse to behave badly. Well, I'm just assertive, so deal with it. Or maybe being overly needy or avoiding conflict when it actually needs to be engaged in the moment. Yeah. So now we want to give you guys a turn, thinking about all this. What we want you to do is take out your notebook or a piece of paper and draw a triangle and put one of the three words on each point: withdrawn, dependent, assertive. Now draw a point within that triangle closest to where you think you might fall. Or if you just know, you heard this and you know, go ahead, circle the one that best describes you. Now, after you've done yourself, draw a point close to the stance you think your spouse might be. And if you aren't sure on any of these, you can just put a point somewhere in the middle, closest to whatever makes sense for you. And then after that, we want you to finish this statement. I connect with my spouse's stance. Here's where you fill in the blank with a feeling. With ease, with caution, with patience, with frustration, with understanding, with confusion, fear, comfort. How do you feel about the stance that they're in? How easy or difficult is for you to connect with that? So with that, pause the video right here and take a few minutes to do this exercise.
You know, I will never forget one of the times that Stephanie was not only the maddest at me, but she was the maddest for the longest time at me.
Because I don't get mad very easily.
No, but it was precisely because I cross-plowed her stance completely in the name of missions.
Ouch!
I know none of you have done this before, so I'm just going to go ahead and share it in the hopes that no one ever does. But this was many years ago, there was a span of a few weeks that we had the convergence of multiple ministry opportunities and responsibilities all at once. I mean, at the time we were hosting a mission team at our house. I mean, we love mission teams, but you and I know the amount of work that goes into hosting teams. Well, on top of having the team in our house, we also had staying with us some pastors that are friends, that are pastoring at one of the churches that supports us. They came down with their whole family. They were there at the same time in our house as the counselor of our missionary internship and a family friend. I mean, in the middle of all of this, I suddenly get called up to go on an 8-day trip to Uruguay to host some roundtables for pastors.
Yeah, we had like almost 30 people in our house.
Yes. And listen, instead of me saying, yeah, listen, I've got way too much on my plate right now. I've already said yes to all of this. I went ahead and dropped the whole mission team, pastoral friend, hosting internship potato in Stephanie's lap. And then I had the gall to be frustrated with her because I felt like she was running away and literally hiding from me. Yeah, I'll never forget. I had a suitcase in the living room. I was saying goodbye to everyone and I couldn't find Stephanie. And so I go looking for her, and I finally found you. Remember, I found you like in the bathroom, crammed between that tiny crevice between the vanity and the shower door.
I don't even know how I fit in there.
I mean, you had a crazed look in your eyes. You were sobbing, tears running down your cheeks, and you're not even a crier. And I remember thinking, like, what's the big deal? And of course, I had the luxury to think that because I was the one getting on the airplane and leaving all this behind. And I just said, oh no, all she needs is a hug and you'll be fine. Listen, girl, God doesn't call you to things that he doesn't equip you for, nonsense. And then she's like, nah, back it up. You did this to me. And I need to figure out how to survive this circus that you put together, not me. Okay, can I just say this out loud? And there's no need to answer it out loud. How many times have we made massive marriage mistakes in the name of missions fruitfulness? See, but the reason I bring all this up is because the whole intensity of the situation made it really hard for us to connect when I got back. And listen, I needed to be okay with the fact that she needed some space to recover, first of all, from the whole experience, and then to process for herself how she was going to go about trusting that I not pull a stunt like this again. See, sometimes what happens is that when we push against our spouse's predominant stance, we're the ones that get frustrated. And we start thinking like they're the ones that are making it hard. They're the ones that are making it hard to connect, or they're all being way too intense about this thing. I mean, this is all they're doing. And it's not so.
That was really tough. But you know what I appreciate is we learned from that and we didn't do that again. You apologized and you made some really big changes and we worked through it. Again, not using our stances as an excuse. We push beyond our limits. We let God stretch us. But we also got to be respectful of how God made us as well. So here's the core thought with this. There is something so refreshing and energizing about being seen and heard and understood. It brings relief, this sense of safety with your spouse. When you're confident that your spouse knows your stance, really just knows you and makes room for you, gets how you tick, respects this part of you, it becomes so much easier to keep meeting each other's needs in the relationship, especially when we live lives that can be demanding and challenging. It is refreshing when there's enough room in our relationship for the unresolved things, and we have someone safe who's willing to hold space for us, who can, like Paul says in Galatians 6, help us carry each other's burdens. Because in ministry, we're real good at doing that for others as humanitarian aid workers or program directors or pastors or counselors. And yet we so often find it awkward or difficult to do it as a friend to our spouse. We expect them to know us, but do we take the effort to get to know them? So in these moments, when our stances or personalities crash against one another, how can we learn from them? How can we hold space for them so that they're able to share something big or something heavy or something that makes them feel vulnerable? Maybe it's resisting the urge to try and fix all their problems. Maybe it's not running away from the conversation, even if it's difficult. Maybe it's meeting their gaze and keeping your body language open instead of closed. Validating and acknowledging their pain or emotions rather than trying to minimize it. Asking if they'd like to share more. Maybe it's being quiet and just letting them say it all without interrupting or defending. Just thanking them for being brave enough to share that part of their heart with you. Or offering silence with your presence if they're just not ready to talk about it yet. Giving them a bit of space to process it first. Because it's not enough to just know your spouse's world and have these detailed love maps on how to get to their heart. It's important to know that when you get there, you'll find a stance that may or may not be natural for you to engage with, and it's going to require some empathy, some intentionality on your part to understand. I will say for those of you who want to dig into this more, the tool of the Enneagram breaks this down even further, and you don't even have to know your number to study the stances out. So you can do more research there if you care to. But right now, what we're going to do is take a break and have you go into your discussion groups using the discussion guides we've given you. And we will see you next time for session 7.